less than 1 week before voters in the 1st Congressional District vote for a Republican candidate for the 1st Congressional District. Today, I talk one-on-one with 1st Congressional District Republican candidate Katie Arrington for this edition of Quintin's Close-Ups. And if you haven't already, subscribe to my YouTube channel and like Quintin's Close-Ups on Facebook. Katie Arrington, welcome back to Quintin's Close-Ups.
Good morning, and thank you for having me.
Oh, you're very welcome. I know that you said on Twitter that you're a servant leader, you're a conservative Republican, a President Trump-endorsed congressional candidate for South Carolina Low Country for the 1st Congressional District. A week out before this June primary, who is Katie Arrington as a candidate?
Same as I was when I started this race. You know, I just as you stated, I'm a servant leader who's going to Washington, not taking the congressional salary, donating it to charity. Not taking the congressional health care and benefits, denying those, because until Congress gives the same rights and respect to those people who have signed on the dotted line to protect our nation, our military, I don't want them. I don't believe in career politicians. I don't believe the tax dollars should go to pay for servant leaders' retirement programs, so I'm not taking that. And I'm term limiting myself to 3 terms. That'd be a total of 6 years, and that's it. I don't have any other political aspirations. I just want to go to Washington and prioritize the needs of the 1st Congressional District. And by that, I mean we need somebody in Washington who is going to prioritize the urgent, immediate needs that are of this nation. They aren't things that just popped up overnight. We're in the middle of an energy crisis. We have the highest inflation in over 50 years. We have a supply chain crisis, we have an education crisis, and we have a security crisis at our border and across our country. We need someone who's going to go to Washington, who has a backbone, who's going to prioritize those needs above all else to bring America back to what you and I remember it to be, not this corrupt, what is right, what is wrong, and now seem to have switched. We're plagued by this transgender issue that is indoctrinating our children and taking over the narrative. We have a security crisis at the southern border where we have more drugs coming in and killing Americans every single day than the totality of Ukraine. And we think that that's the problem. We have to come back America first. That's why President Trump endorsed me. I'm an America first candidate who's going to Washington to make America my priority.
What about the 1st Congressional District as your priority?
Absolutely. So all those things that directly align with the America First agenda are that of the 1st Congressional District. Faith, family, and freedom. That's what we care about. We have somebody who's sitting up at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, and my opponent, Nancy Mace, after the State of the Union, said she was optimistic about the Biden administration. And just last week, the President of the United States, when sworn in, takes an oath of office to defend and protect the Constitution. And he went on, I think, 18 different news outlets to say that the Constitution is not absolute. We are in crisis mode, and we need people going to Washington that are going to know that the 1st Congressional District cannot take the record high fuel prices. We cannot take the empty store shelves. We cannot take the energy crisis that has befallen us. We cannot take the education crisis because the federal government is involved in our children's schooling. We need to send somebody to Washington who's going to prioritize those needs. Now, Nancy Mace, in her own words, not mine, have your listeners Google Nancy Mace, Amazon, January 2022, where she did an interview with Forbes magazine. And she said, the thing that unifies all Americans, this is her words, is Britney Spears, pot, and pets. Now, I don't know about you, Quintin, but I don't think that's what we sit around the dinner table talking at night about.
What will unify the 1st Congressional District?
The things that will unify, as I've said, faith, family, freedom, right? We got to bring God back into the narrative, okay? They've spent years taking God out. Our founding fathers based this country on the principles of the 10 Commandments, the Bible, Jesus Christ, the whole 9 yards. It's so emphatic. When you say the Pledge of Allegiance, Quintin, what does it say? One nation under God.
Yes. Yes.
On our money, what does it say?
Yes.
In God we trust.
Yes.
We need to bring God back. Faith is so needed in this country right now. We need to have faith brought back. Family, we want to take care of our children, right? We want to take care of our elderly and our children. We have that. We have a crisis, an educational crisis, where our kids are getting indoctrinated into the CRT narrative, the social emotional learning. They're talking to kindergartners about sexual orientation. That is not what family and faith and freedom are about. That's Washington, D.C. That's why I propose we dissolve the Department of Federal Education, have the money follow the child, whether the child goes to public, private, charter, or homeschool. We need to take the bloated government and reduce the size of it. More government is not good. Less government is better. We need to bring more control back to the state and county level. That's where it should belong. It shouldn't belong in Washington, D.C. You know, my job should be cutting the bloated big government and putting it back to the states. Just like with education, the states should decide.
Now, you promised to disband the United States Department of Education, says money should follow students, even if they go to public private schools, that is. What would you replace the department with?
Nothing. Why do we need it? Jimmy Carter set it up. Jimmy Carter made it a cabinet level position and created it. We don't need it. We have states that understand how to educate our children. The thing that federal government has gotten involved, they brought us Common Core. Really? Think about that, Quintin. There's nothing in D.C. that we don't know how to educate our children on. And we have enough educators in the state of South Carolina, enough well-educated experts to determine how we need to educate our children. But we also take into respect that, you know, Nancy Mace, the woman that I'm running against, she voted with the Democrats to take down the Calhoun statue, to remove Confederate statues around the Capitol building. Removing history does not change it. And if you are not aware of our history, if you don't look back and say, these are the mistakes that we have made, you are doomed to repeat them again. We should look back and say to ourselves, that was a bad time in our country. That is a mistake that we made. And we should remember and be cognizant of that, never to make that mistake again. But our education system doesn't want to teach things that are unpalatable. We need to know the truth about how our country was formed, and the good, the bad, the ugly, and the pretty. That's part of it.
Now, and let's make a disclaimer here. I've actually emailed Mace's folks a couple of times in Washington for an interview. I haven't heard back yet. I spoke to her personally at the CWE opening reception in February, and I haven't heard back yet. And I know that locally she didn't vote for the takedown of the Calhoun statue, but I know that, as you mentioned, she voted for the takedown statues within the United States. But let me ask you this, Katie. Going back to, obviously, if you had the opportunity to do so, disbanding the United States Department of Education, how much money would the federal government actually lose behind this?
Federal government isn't going to lose any money. That's your money. It's not the federal government's money. Think about that, Quintin. It's your tax dollars going to Washington. Do you really think that department serves any benefit to you? To the children of this district? I don't. It serves no purpose. Let the education be at the state level.
Speaking of state level, Katie, let me ask you this. What is one example of critical race theory taught in South Carolina schools?
So in social studies, when they're not taught about the full dynamic of the Civil War, the full dynamic, and understanding that it was both economical, an economic war, it was a social and moral war, and it was in a lot of cases a religious war, and understanding why people fought it. And that at the outcome of it, slaves that were freed were not less than. And in schools, they teach that the slave children, that after June 19th, when the last slaves were freed, that they were less than, that they didn't have the same opportunities. You have to put it in the context that all men were created free and equal, and that we as a country have done amazing things in that short time to bring it all around. I mean, remember, we have now, I don't believe in South Carolina that we have a racial crisis. I think it's fabricated by the media. I think that when our Senator, Tim Scott, after the Emmanuel 9 shooting, and when Al Sharpton wanted to come to town and Jesse Jackson wanted to come to town and create a narrative, our senator said, no, thank you. We here in South Carolina are about unity. We here in South Carolina are about love and compassion. And we created, if you remember, Quintin, I believe you were there, the Unity Bridge over the Ravenel.
Right.
And we all locked hands and we prayed. And we prayed for the victims, but we also prayed for the shooter. That's us here in South Carolina. I don't know about you, but I don't see you as, Quintin, a black man. I see my American patriot friend who cares enough about this country that on his free time, he does interviews with politicians to keep people aware. That's what I see. And when we start talking about that narrative, that we see each other as Quintin and Katie, and I look at what you're doing, you work a full-time job, when you have 5 free minutes, you devote, this is your passion and your hobby. That's what America is. That's who we are. And we need to start promoting that conversation. We need to start talking about that with the masses, not what Washington media wants us to talk about, not what one particular social group wants to talk about. Let's talk about real Americans.
Well, you this. Can you tell me one South Carolina school that actually teaches CRT?
Well, there are many. I mean, Quintin, the CRT into schools is there. It's sprinkled about. The Moms for Liberty have come in and been very loud and loud about it. Talking to children, part of the CRT initiative is talking to children far before they're ready about sexual orientation and sexuality. And it doesn't belong in my mind. I remember when I was a young girl, I had to get a permission slip from my mom and dad when I went into the 8th grade to take sex ed. That is part of, what we need, that's what we need to bring back. Kindergartners, first graders, second graders, third graders, fourth graders. We don't need to be having these discussions with our kids in school.
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. And what more do you know about CRT now that you didn't know, say, 2 years ago?
A lot. One of the things from the pandemic, I think all of us can say happened. The lemonade out of the lemons of the pandemic was that the veil was lifted, right? Our parents were front and center to what their children were being educated. That's why there's this big upsurgence of awareness that they were actually seeing it. Parents kind of had, and I don't say, I say we were, some of us were complacent that our kids were going to school and get educated, and they were of the assumption they were getting educated the same way we were. I'll tell you one of the things that came up immediately in our family. We have 4 grandchildren. If you can see the little guys there, they're right there. My husband and I were talking to our grandsons who are getting ready to go to kindergarten about math. And we were teaching them the way we were taught math. Do you know there's a new way to teach math? It's called new math. And the way I learned how to do math is I carried the 1, right? When I added on the vertical, right? You put the numbers on top of each other and you add and you carry the 1. No, that is incorrect. And a teacher will not accept that in school today. It's new math and it's linear. And the kids have to show this entire process. Why did we go and change the way we were teaching math? Has math changed any? Has adding 1 plus 1 changed? But yet there's a new way to teach math that is far more complicated. It causes a barrier between the parent and the child because we weren't taught new math. And that gap between mom and dad don't know what they're talking about. The teacher's telling me to do it this way. Why would we ever do that? It's just an awakening, and it's something that we can correct. I think we're definitely moving in that direction here in South Carolina, but there's more work to be done.
And I've got to fast forward this, unfortunately, but you said, let me go back 2 weeks ago to really right down the street here at Burke High School. Obviously, there was a debate between you and Nancy Mace because obviously the other candidate, Lindsey Piper Loomis, dropped out of the race and actually endorsed you. You said in the press release, Katie, that you won the South Carolina first congressional debate 2 weeks ago in a landslide. Let me ask you this. How could you declare yourself the winner literally 30 minutes after the debate?
Quintin, did you watch the debate?
Oh, I watched it.
Okay. Tell me what point in that debate Nancy Mace made that was the crowd believed or bought into. There was nothing. Saying you're a fiscal conservative and running on that and then not going and submitting the bills that you said were the priority of becoming a fiscal conservative and reducing the spend, like the penny plan, saying that that was your priority in 2020, but it took you almost 2 years to file that bill. When you have somebody who voted to give $40 billion to Ukraine, when we have a crisis at home, when you have somebody who has prioritized legalizing recreational drugs, submitted more bills about pets' rights than human rights, and refuses to acknowledge the January 6th victims and perpetrators, both, have been denied due process, how can you think that she won when she voted against the Constitution to subpoena Steve Bannon? How do you think she won that election with acknowledging she voted to certify the elections? Exactly how do you think that she won? By her last little end where she lied about her competitor and a clearance issue that is not there?
You about that because from the AP it says this: GOP candidates' security clearance becomes an issue in South Carolina. Let me ask you, Katie, did you put America first when you had your security clearance been suspended by the Pentagon?
Quintin, I didn't have my security clearance suspended from the Pentagon. And I'm going to say I find it offensive, and I love you to death, but you didn't do your research.
Well, let me ask you this. Were any of
You're reading a news headline, and if you had read the whole article, you would have read the part where Meg Kennard
right.
stated what? That the story was untrue, that I still maintain my clearance, and I was not fired.
Well, let me ask you this. Were any Department of Defense contractors compromised by your handling of classified secrets?
Absolutely not, Quintin, and I'm offended that you're asking me that.
Why do you think your security clearance hasn't been reinstated then?
It is, Quintin.
Well, let me ask you this. Was there any malice in you allegedly leaking classified information?
I never leaked classified information.
In your position there, did you work in cybersecurity and not in logistics?
I worked over the industrial base. I was in charge of cybersecurity for weapon systems and critical infrastructure, to include the $380 billion that is spent by U.S. taxpayers. I then went on to lead the Department of Defense acceleration on the supply chain for the pandemic. I was in charge of getting the medical supplies, the supplies for the country, into the country and around the world. So that portion was part of logistics.
So why were you reportedly in the recent video taking credit for keeping the shelves that is stocked before President Biden came into office if you weren't really working in logistics at the Department of Defense, that is?
Quintin, I just answered that question. I said that during the pandemic, I switched the role. I took over the DoD lead for acceleration of the supply chain to include the movement and shipment of PPE around the world, both domestically and abroad, and the supply chain. I was part of that team. I started my morning at 4 a.m. making sure that the airplanes that were in China that we had contracted were taking off, that they were full of what I said needed to be on those planes, and that they were destined for where we needed them to go in the United States where we could be dispersing PPE, medication, and supplies that were coming in from China, Indonesia, Europe, etc. I then worked with all of the states to make sure that the distribution was set up, that we had trucks ready when the airplanes landed, and that those trucks knew where the PPE or the supplies, food, whatever, needed to go.
Why? Obviously, you said your clearance has been reinstated, according to you. Why hasn't that resonated with the voters about the 1st Congressional District?
Quintin, have you ever held a clearance? Have you ever held a clearance?
Well, hold on.
No, I'm asking you. Have you ever?
Well,
I'm asking you.
Yeah, let me ask the question. Why is that not resonating with these voters? This information is still floating out there a week before this primary. Why isn't this resonating with these people?
Quintin, I'll ask again. Have you ever held a clearance?
Well, let me ask again. Why isn't this resonating? Why aren't
well,
you?
Obviously, so I'll help answer your question.
Okay.
If you had a clearance, you would understand there's no way to prove you have a clearance. That is not public knowledge. I have in my possession, in my home, my CAT card. I'm sure you don't know what a CAT card is. Okay. I have my SIPR tablet. Do you know what a SIPR tablet is?
I know all about that.
I have my diplomatic passport in my house. I have my JWIX drop in my house. I still have my government laptop in my house. I have all of that. Do you have that in your possession if you don't have a clearance?
Let me ask you this, because this is not about me at all. But during your 1 year and 1 term in South Carolina House of Representatives, you reportedly voted for the largest tax hike in South Carolina history. Not once, but twice, Katie. And then you also voted against the constitutional carry reportedly as well. Isn't this a definition of rhino?
You really didn't do your research, Quintin.
I always do my research.
Okay, so I voted no.
For over a decade, you know that. You know that.
Okay, so I voted no on H.R. 3700, which was a bad bill on constitutional carry. It denied someone their First Amendment right, and it didn't have national reciprocity. If we're going to make a constitutional carry bill, we need to make the right constitutional carry bill. So when they proposed H.R. 3700, I, along with Mike Pitts, who at the time in 2016 was the leader of the NRA in the state of South Carolina, co-sponsored H.R. 3930. 3700 was filed 270 bills later, probably a couple of days, and I co-sponsored the concealed carry bill that provided the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, and national reciprocity. And I voted yes on that bill every single time. So I appreciate that you're trying to get the splash of, I voted no for concealed carry. I voted down a bad bill. I voted for the right bill. Now, if you want to talk about the gas tax, let's talk about it. I'm the one who had to find a solution locally for our infrastructure problems because the federal government wasn't going to do it. We have tourism and commercial traffic driving across our roads. And if you really want to go back to 2016, which I, for the life of me, can't understand how 2016 has any impact on 2022, but let's go there. At 2016, when in 1979, a national fuel surcharge was levied by Jimmy Carter, might I add. And in the state of South Carolina, they put that in, but they never tacked along inflation. So all of our sister states around us had inflation attached to that fuel surcharge. And as inflation rose, so did the amount of money that they had for road construction. That's why when you drive into states like Florida and Georgia and North Carolina, their roads are substantially different because they had from 1979 until 2017, they had the additional fund of inflation because the cost of construction in 1979 and the cost of construction in 2017 was much different because of inflation. So what we did as a state house majority and Senate majority was we put in to put inflation to rise with that fuel surcharge. We also put in, which nobody wants to report on, I fought for, and it was in the bill, and it doesn't sunset, is that every South Carolina resident in their income tax All they have to do is say the amount of gallons of gas they used a year, and they get a rebate on their income tax. I did that. That was me, because
By
it wasn't
yourself?
about on the committee. I was on the committee. I did that. You're talking about me saying I voted for the gas tax. I was on the committee. I worked hard to make sure the rebate was there for South Carolinian residents. And then as soon as we were done with that committee, I started on the first ever income tax reduction committee with Shannon Erickson. I brought forth that veterans shouldn't be paying income tax in South Carolina, and that we had a surplus and we needed to reduce the income tax. That, you should go look. In 2018, I sat on that committee, and that was one of the things I fought hard for. Now, it takes the House a while to get through things. This year, you're getting the income state tax reduction because we don't need the surplus that we have. So I did all that, but we're, of course, not going to talk about that.
Oh, you just did. But let me ask you this. What is the surplus right now?
Oh, I'm not in the State House. I know it's in the billions. It's an incredible amount of money. That's why when, the pretend President Joe Biden came out the other day and said that, if schools didn't take, the indoctrination and teach transgender to our students, that they would pull lunch money. We in South Carolina don't need lunch money from the federal government if that's the ties that come with it. We can dip into our surplus, and we sure can take care of our kids in South Carolina.
What are the costs of construction right now, Katie?
So in one project alone, down in Hilton Head, I can tell you the cost of the bridge that they've been talking about doing. The inflation cost on that bridge is raised at $100 million.
Now,
$100 million.
Right. And speaking of the Biden administration, you said this on Twitter, quote, "Welcome to the Biden administration. Gasoline is up 43.6%. Used cars are up 22.7%. Meats, fish, and eggs are up 14.3%. Food at home is up 10.8%. But let me ask you this, Katie. Is perhaps record profits from big oil prices gouging the root of the inflation situation right now?
No, it's the fact that Joe Biden has shut down the capital markets on our domestic oil production is the main root of the cause. Shutting down the Keystone Pipeline is a future state problem, but shutting down the permits that we were using on our off the shores in the Gulf of Mexico and in Alaska, that's how this has happened. It's not the oil companies. The only way supply and demand goes up, right? If you cut the supply, the cost goes up. Biden cut the supply, therefore the cost goes up. It has nothing to do with the profit levels of the oil companies. It has to do with the person sitting at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, somehow or another, through his executive power, which I don't believe that he has influenced and cut capital markets.
What were the capital markets prior to this?
What was the capital? I'm sorry, you've cut out.
Oh,
Capital markets.
Yeah, prior to this inflation. What was that? What were those
The capital markets were free flowing because we had reduced the regulations on them. Gas prices were about $1.89 a gallon. When you have a supply, a readily, easily accessible, low-cost supply that is domestic, it lessens the cost. The Biden administration has made us dependent on Iran, Russia, China for oil. Therefore, the cost has gone up.
Now, in what way do you support in what way do you support the $40 billion aid package for Retraining like the current Congresswoman?
I don't.
Now, I know
You
that
can't borrow money from China to pay a bill.
now, as you know, President Trump wants to get rid of NATO. Would you?
I'm struggling to see how they're benefiting the world in any regard right now. But I'm always a child to learn. Education is key. I would love to hear the world's getting up to Washington and get everybody's input about it. But I can tell you, in my experience in DoD, NATO was not something that was easily negotiated and didn't always benefit the United States.
Now, let me turn to Roe versus Wade. You said this on Twitter that you made it clear that you're the only candidate that is 100% pro-life with no exceptions. Any exceptions for incest or rape?
No.
You said that you don't want to, okay, no worries about that. Let me go on. You said this, that you don't want to be the face of this particular district, you said. Who should be that face then?
You, the people of this district. Why I would represent everyone here? Why would I use one particular face?
And leading...
And I am no more or less important than you.
Oh, thank you. And leading up to the obviously the June 14th primary, what is that one thing that people still don't know about Katie Arrington?
I think everybody knows, that I'm an America First candidate, that I'm going to Washington to prioritize the needs of the district, that I've been and continue to be a servant leader. This is not about a popularity of, I can't, getting on Fox News and putting ridiculous bills forward. Nancy Mace wrote a bill, co-sponsored it with AOC. AOC herself, that felons, people who commit felonies, shouldn't have to put their criminal record on a job application for a federal job. That's not what is a priority of this district. Nancy Mace put forth legislation to her way of punishing China for the vast amount of human rights offenses, the fact that they have been stealing our intellectual property, the fact that they have been gouging our nation for years. Her way to punish China was to ensure that baby pandas born in America aren't repatriatized to China. That's not someone who's a conservative. She's not a fiscal conservative. You know what she wants to spend $10 million of your tax dollars doing a year? Finding more humane ways to have pigs give birth. That's not a fiscal conservative. So what people should know about me is that I am truly a fiscal conservative. I find solutions, and I want the solutions more on the state level where we have more control than the federal government. And that if you want someone who's going to solve problems like finishing the border wall without U.S. tax dollars, talk to me. I've got the solution. If you want someone who understands and has a solution to fix the crisis in our schools, talk to me. I've got the solutions. If you want someone who's going to logically look at the deficit and how to get the spend down, look at me. I have solutions. There's no reason why we in the U.S. government don't put a toll at the southern and northern border and get $10 a car, $10 an axle for people, and it's in our Constitution to travel into this country. $10. We could create $1.9 billion annually. We could pay for the wall. We could offset the cost of Border Patrol and Customs, and we can offset the cost of the Department of Immigration, and we can reduce our budget. But we need people like me in Washington who are going there with solutions, whereas Nancy Mace has done nothing more than create problems to solve. And that is what a swamp elite rhino does. I have done nothing in my career but try and find solutions to problems, not create them.
Katie, does the average person in this, and I'm sitting in the 1st Congressional District right now, does the average citizen constituent know who the heck AOC is?
Yes. Yes. They've seen what's happened. Quintin, you can't walk around this district and talk to a mom who has 2 kids who's walking into the grocery store and she can't afford milk and bread. When you walk into the grocery store and you see a single father standing in front of the formula aisle and it's empty. Yeah, they know who AOC is.
Now, besides the national issues, Katie, what exactly local can you do for the constituents right now? Infrastructure?
To get our fair share back of our tax dollars that go to Washington for our infrastructure and get the federal government out of the way so the state can do what the state needs to do.
How many tax dollars have actually been sent to the United States Congress in Washington over the past 4 years?
Quintin, I am 10 minutes past another interview. I need to wrap this up.
Well, let me ask you one last question. I know, obviously, the big issue is 2020, obviously the 2020 elections and whatnot. Talk to me. Was the presidential election stolen?
Yes. Did you see 2,000 Mules?
Huh?
Did you see 2,000 Mules?
What do you mean, Katie?
Did you watch 2,000 mules.
Well, let me ask you this then. Where's your evidence of this?
It's all over. There's videotapes from the federal government that were on the ballot boxes. They have people that are on video. We have their IP address from their phones, cell tracking devices,
Right.
that they went to 501c3s, nonprofits. They picked up ballots, more than 20 at a time, and went to multiple ballot boxes every night for a series and stuffing ballot boxes.
Do you have that evidence on you?
Absolutely. It's on 2,000 Mules and all over the internet. You should watch 2,000 Mules, Quintin.
Katie Arrington, and besides all of this, I love you. Thank you.
I love you too, Quintin. Take care.
I'll talk to you soon. Thank you for your time on Quintin's Close-Ups.